Hi, everyone. We're live. No one's here yet because we're live earlier, 15 minutes earlier. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're live now, though.
We're
We're
live
live now.
now.
Yeah.
Hi,
Welcome, my friend.
everyone. Welcome back. Great to have you all here. Welcome back, Peter. Welcome back,
Thank you, thank you.
Saul. Welcome back, Nick. Nick's been here.
Yeah, we had a special show on Saturday. We had Danny Haifong. We had Dr. Kareem Batesh. She's not here today, but you guys know we've grown this. It's called the International Leftist Coalition for a reason. We've grown it. So on the show with CJ yesterday, hopefully you guys enjoyed the Nick and CJ show. We announced we're gonna do the. I think I'm leading, and I still want to. I will get you guys thoughts on the name. Like Peter and the Saw can weigh in as well. We're leaning more towards like International Solidarity Summit, but then the Kareem, you guys know how Kareem is. Kareem's opinionated. Kareem hit me up like, man, you gotta have anti-capitalists in there. You gotta have anti-imperialists in there. I'm like, bro,
I'm
I
with
hear you. I hear
Kareem.
you. So I don't know. Maybe it's still the exact name of the summit, but you guys gonna see like this international like leftist, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, whatever you want to call it, coalition grow even more. So we've got Peter and Assault back for this episode on this rotation, the International Leftist Coalition. Peter and Assault, how
I
you guys
like,
doing?
not bad, not bad. I just wanted to say I like that acronym, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist. It's SIE. So if you had that like in Brazil, that would be a neat little tie-in.
The
Sai.
problem, the problem is
Acai.
the problem is a lot of people have hangups over calling it International Leftist Coalition, mostly because people who hijacked the term leftist, and that's why Cream he was like, if you call it anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, it's clear where we stand, and that's the coalition we need to build, right? So also in the house, I'm glad you're able to join us. I'm glad you're getting better. We all going through some
Thank you.
we all going through some things, huh? How you doing, this all?
Yeah. I experienced COVID for the second time, and it was funny because a lot of people thought because I rage tweeted about it, and people thought that it was like an own to say that I'm triple vaccinated and I got it for a second time, and it's like completely ignoring all of the issues that people related about the pandemic, which is basically how we've handled it from the very beginning, right? Like why there are variants because of vaccine apartheid, why and I said and emphasized this point, I got it from someone who wasn't vaccinated. So the problem, I have found it so interesting, and this will relate to when we talk about Afghanistan and what's going on right now and everywhere else, but I find it so frustrating that so many Americans refuse to get vaccines when there are people literally dying in other places of the world for them, if they're wishing that they could have access to them. And we're actually like throwing them away when they expire. They're just like, oh well, we couldn't use these. So there seems to be a better way. I'm getting ahead of myself, but there seems to be a better way that we could have handled this entire situation. But thankfully, I'm doing better. You can see
Good.
I'm still upset about
I'm glad you're recovering, and I think what everyone wants is just best for public health, right? Best for public health, and like people even seeing the CDC caught lying and caught doing propaganda on behalf of like the capitalist class, behalf of Delta CEOs. Like that's kind of shit that turns people off. That kind of shit that make people untrustworthy. So I always advocate people do what's best for them, was what's healthy for them, right? There's a lot of things they don't tell you to do, right? But anyway, we're back, and like Peter been quarantined, I'm quarantining myself. It's been wild. It's been wild. It's been a wild time. It's been a wild time, but we're back on the International Leftist Coalition. I'm gonna pass it back to Josana.
How are you doing, Peter?
I'm good, thank you. Nice to be back home, but missing the Americas a little bit. So it's a sigh.
No. I just used the Sai part of it because SAI is actually like leave. But no. It's
Oh,
acai. Acai,
Oh,
no
okay.
acai. You were
Okay.
right. You were right.
Anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist berries.
It's a berry. It's a delicious berry. I was thinking like about of what Nick and Asal just brought. It's like the relationship of trust, right? You don't have universal healthcare in this country, so how can you trust that they are actually trying to treat you against a pandemic? On top of that, now that the corporations need us to work sick, it's only 5 days for the quarantine. So like, yeah, there's no trusting relationship between us and the government of the United States of America. I would like to bring up our first topic of the week, and we're going to talk about the Afghan issue. And I would love to have Nick to give us an introduction and then go to Asal.
Oh, Afghanistan. Okay, so let's see. How should I start this? Let me say it like this. So, as an anti-imperialist, Joe Biden scared me from day one, and I kept my eye on him during the entire Afghanistan ordeal. And what's going on in Afghanistan and the messaging that I see from even the neocons reveals a lot. And I remember I had this conversation with Saul. We covered this on International Leftist Coalition. I remember when Joe Biden, quote unquote, pulled out of Afghanistan, quote unquote, right? Remember all the neocons that melted down about oh my God, there's a massive humanitarian crisis because you guys are pulling out Afghanistan. You guys are leaving and abandoning this failed foreign policy endeavor. So this is causing a humanitarian crisis. Remember how they used to care about that, right? Now, and this is why I made an argument before as an anti-imperialist, I don't consider you out unless you completely out. Unless you're completely out. So you can give props about reducing troop levels, but if you're still waging economic war, if you're still doing drone strikes, well, once again, there was innocent civilians that were killed by Afghanistan drone strike shortly after, quote unquote, Biden pulled out as well. Like these are the kind of things as a principled anti-imperialist. When I see the military budget increase, when I see the continued economic warfare and sanctions, like I'm not happy when I see that. So I was warning people like, don't leap false praise on this guy because he didn't end the war. He just changed the strategy. And we talk about sanctions many times on the show, what the strategy of sanctions are. So the United States are not happy that the Taliban take over. They have to delegitimize the country. And I'm going to get into the exact nature on how the United States is complicit with the Afghanistan crisis as it is right now. But before I actually dive into that, I want to pass this on Peter. Peter, anything you guys want to add before I dive more into the story?
I mean, obviously, I want to hear everything that you're going to say about it before adding.
Yeah, let me do my dive. Let me do my dive. So you guys understand, we have done segments explaining why sanctions are an act of war and they are a war crime. If you engage in economic sanctions, I consider that like you damn near complicit with in genociding a country, because 23 million Afghans now face severe hunger. They have malnutrition. Like you had a ton of Afghans freezing. Like the United States and Joe Biden, they froze Afghanistan assets, right? So let me share this with you guys. Let me pull the tweet up because this is what I tweeted before. One second, let me share this. So this is what Joe Biden is complicit with doing. So this is what's going on in Afghanistan with the humanitarian crisis. Now you got the UN who's calling for massive aid. You had the Western nations. You had including the United States, who the corporate media is complicit with polishing their war crimes. And now they're like, oh my God, the United States is trying to commit humanitarian aid towards this crisis that they caused. They caused it. So the deaths that is going on in Afghanistan, which is turning to one of the world's biggest humanitarian crises, next to Yemen, another genocide that Joe Biden is funding, the quote unquote lesser of two evils, right? The deaths will be brought about as a result of deliberate policy decisions made in the U.S. alongside new sanctions imposed after the Taliban takeover. Because as you guys know, the economic sanctions are a strategy the United States do to delegitimize a government that they dislike. So the reason why I said as an anti-imperialist, I am not praising Biden for pulling out of Afghanistan, because he never pulled out. He just changed the strategy. So if you have we have millions of people that are going to starve to death. We have Afghanistan as a country and their infrastructure being destroyed economically. I'm asking you, what's the difference between that and boots on the ground doing that? As an anti-imperialist, I'm asking you guys that question. To me, I don't see that much of a difference. So the U.S. froze nearly $10 billion of Afghanistan central bank holdings there. The Biden administration refuses to release the funds despite public protests in Afghanistan by Afghans. The Intercept did great coverage on this, and they alluded to what I was saying earlier about the hypocrisy of the neocons. I just told you about the humanitarian crisis that's going on in right now in Afghanistan. They was loud when it came to pulling out troops out of Afghanistan, right? But now you got the sanctions. Now they nowhere to be found. In fact, they would cheerlead this on. They support the sanctions because it's something that the neoliberal Biden regime agrees to do, right? So now they get into more detail. The WHO has warned that up to 1 million Afghan children may die as a result of malnutrition over the winter. Economic war is war. The U.S. sanctions policy is directly to blame. Afghans over the edge as they already struggle to deal with COVID-19 pandemic and political upheaval created by the collapse of the central government. So pretty much like on top of the sanctions that we already put on the country, and the horrific response to COVID, I want to pass it to Asalka. I know she explained this before, and she does a good job explaining the horrific COVID response in Afghanistan because of the United States. But on top of the Biden and United States policy that they refuse to lift, and making things worse to the point you even have, and I'm gonna share you guys with the article. You have families that are selling their kids for food. That's how dire the situation is. This is because of the United States policy. Meanwhile, you got a lot of Western chauvinists who still believe that United States political interests and interference in these countries are for the betterment of these countries. Now we see why that's ridiculous. Now I want to pass it to the panel for any immediate thoughts, and then we can discuss and share more information on Afghanistan. I'll go to Saul first, and then we go around the panel.
So I think one of the things that's important to highlight is when you talk about these frozen assets, right? It's not just a question of purchasing power, right? It's not like the Taliban is going to take that money and then spend it on specific things. What the $10 billion reflects is the funds of Afghanistan's central bank. What that means is basically their banking system. How does a banking system work if there's no money, right? Like, how do you go to a bank and take out money if there is no money? So it's not just a question of access to funds, but a collapse of the entire financial system, right? That's the impact it has when you've completely depleted a nation's bank reserves. And so, one of the consequences is obviously, for instance, government workers not getting paid out, civil servants not getting paid their wages. So people aren't getting paid. There's no flow of money. This is why it becomes such an insanely big disaster. It feels like almost overnight, right? Within months, you have this massive disaster because we are depriving an entire financial system of oxygen by depriving it of money, right? So that's the large consequence of the policy that we're undertaking. And what's the logic behind the policy? The United States, and this is most of the world, doesn't recognize the Taliban government because the Taliban is not good. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and argue that it is. It's absurd, right? No one is... people who are arguing that U.S. policy that is starving Afghans does not mean they are advocating for the Taliban. we are just facing the reality that this is not a pro-Taliban position. It is an pro-human position, to understand that regardless of how you feel about the Taliban, we were there, we, the United States, were there for 20 years. And if eradicating the Taliban was actually one of our objectives, maybe after 20 years we would have done it, but we didn't. So, even when we talk about the war in Afghanistan, I call it a failure all the time. There are others who don't. It's not a failure if you're a defense contractor. It's not a failure if you're part of the upper echelons of the Afghan state and you are, someone like the Ghani government and you immediately left with a ton of money. So it's not that it was a failure for people who wanted to line their pockets, but it's a failure in the sense that what were our political objectives? If our political objective was to get rid of the Taliban, we failed. If our political objective was to get rid of terrorism, we failed. If our political objective was to create a new sort of contemporary, modern, secular, however you want to describe it, state that is to the taste of the United States, we failed. So it's really a question of what we talk about when we talk about, how we describe war as a success or a failure. But to Nick's original point, and I think this has to be emphasized, the notion of an anti-war movement, anyone who is a peace advocate, anyone who is an anti-war advocate, if this is your stance across the board, has to include US sanctions policy. You cannot have a discussion about being anti-war without discussing sanctions policy, because sanctions have a similar effect. Like, why are we against war? Because it kills people, it kills innocent civilians, it devastates their lives. What do you think sanctions do? Do you think if 23 million people are on the brink of starvation, that's less impactful than war? Arguably, it's more impactful. More people will likely die. More Afghans will die right now because of the sanctions policy that is in place, that will starve people, will die in 20 years of war. That is clearly not a better policy. That is not a more humane policy. And just to put it in perspective, when we say 23 million, I mean, the numbers should be enough, right? Just saying 23 million, that's a shocking number. But the population of Afghanistan is under 40 million. So we're looking at more than 50% of the population is food insecure. That is an insane number. The equivalent would be if, 170 million Americans were facing food insecurity. Think about it on that scale. So I'll let Peter add his commentary.
Yeah, I mean, I co-sign everything you just said. I don't know. I guess the first thing I would say is just to go to Nick's question originally. Like, as an anti-imperialist, what do you think about the withdrawal of troops? Well, that's a good thing. And I look at what the blob is thinking and take the opposite side, like 99% of the time. And since the blob absolutely hates it, then I love it all the more. But that's one way of waging warfare. By getting U.S. troops out of there, what do you actually do on the ground? Well, you have fewer people being killed in the middle of the night by U.S. kill teams going in and assassinating somebody that an informant said was Taliban or Al Qaeda or what have you, but you have no idea if that's true, or they just have a grudge against a neighbor. So you eliminate that kind of killing. But the real question is, what is the policy that is replacing it? And so if the policy replacing it is murderous sanctions, then it's just the same evil result by a different means. And when it comes to blob thinking, if you just look at IR theory, it's all about maximizing power, and that's certainly the core of it. That's certainly like the biggest driver of U.S. foreign policy thinking. But there's also like this weird, and also you can kind of provide your perspective on this. This is just my take on it. It seems like there's also this emotional kind of revenge component to it as well. And I saw that in U.S. policy towards Iran, like because of the revolution and because of like the CIA people being taken and tortured and all of their secrets extracted out of them during the revolution. It seems like that created like a real emotional grudge among the blob members against Iran, where their policy towards Iran can't be entirely explained just by pure power maximization. It seems like there's also this irrational emotional component to it. And I worry that something similar might happen in Afghanistan, because you're dealing with this massive loss of face, this massive defeat against one of the weakest enemies in the world, against the strongest empire in world history. So the people who run that empire, I'm worried that they're going to react in this similarly irrational, emotional, vengeful way against the people of Afghanistan, simply because they're so ashamed of their defeat. I don't know. Asa, what do you think about that possibility of like an emotional, irrational, vengeful component to U.S. foreign policy against Iran, and if you think that might happen with Afghanistan as well?
I actually think you bring up a really good point. What's funny is I have been working on a report, which comes out next week, where basically I look at this sort of historical narrative of the way that the US has approached Iran since the revolution that you're talking about, but more specifically since the embassy seizure and the hostage crisis that started in November of 1979. And that very point that you make, that point of sort of like humiliation, right? It was a humiliating moment for the United States. And there was absolutely a rhetoric of vengeance that came out. And the example I used was, people think like, oh, that was a really long time ago. That was like 40 years ago. In 2020, in January of 2020, after the illegal assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general, by the Trump administration, by the United States, in those like few days of turmoil where everybody was scared that we were really on the brink of a larger conflict with Iran, one of the things that Trump tweeted was that he would target Iranian cultural sites. Now, the fact that that's a war crime aside, he specified the number 52 cultural sites in Iran, and that's one for every hostage that was taken in 1979. So this notion of vengeance and sort of coloring our politics being colored by ideological and sort of fanatic ideas is something we don't talk about enough. So I'm so glad, Peter, that you brought it up. Absolutely, I think you can make a certain connection to Afghanistan in the sense that, again, it's a certain humiliation, right? How can the most powerful country in the world, a country that has the largest military in the world by far, that funds its military, I mean, more than the next 10 top spenders combined, how can it lose a war? And this is why that's not the narrative, right? That's not what came out of the Biden administration. No one will ever say from these administrations, hey, we lost the war. They'll twist the narrative and make it sound like, no, we accomplished what we needed to. What that means, what we needed to accomplish will always change based on who the administration is and what sort of story they're trying to sell. But there's definitely an ideological reasoning behind a lot of our policies, which completely undermine our own national security, our own national interests. So when you have policies that undermine our own objectives, what other logical explanation do you have? Yes, it's painted to a certain extent by a certain amount of fanaticism. And I've made that point in juxtaposing the way that we deal with Iran, say, which is like the archetypal enemy. It's like this is our quintessential enemy, and then versus say a country like Israel, which no matter what it does is our ally and friend. Even when Israel acts to undermine specific US policies, for instance, when the Obama administration and now the Biden administration is trying to secure a diplomatic deal with Iran, you have Israel undermining that. But we won't say or do anything that's critical of Israel. So this is not policy based in logic. This is policy that has an emotional element, that has a sort of zealous element to it. And that's something that we don't talk about enough.
Yeah, there have been multiple studies that have shown, and even written in The Economist, I was just reading, where it shows how sanctions are inherently ineffective, and the U.S. government knows that. Damn, my light almost fucking fell on my head there. But they continue that as well, because the idea that they have is that we have sanctions, we can actually help influence the government to a more pro-American style thinking. And that we know that's a failure, because when you actually starve the people, the only thing that happens is you radicalize the people against your country. Now the people are even more upset. Do you think people are dumb enough to not understand what's going on here? And this is what Asal was alluding to, the freezing of Afghanistan funds. And despite the protests that have been going on in Afghanistan over the Biden administration's actions, the Biden administration refused to do anything, which is nothing less than like psychopathic behavior. Like that is unbelievably evil. But anyway, like the article says, hundreds of protesters marched through the streets of Kabul on Tuesday to demand the United States unfreeze Afghanistan financial assets. The protesters chanted anti-American slogans. So your strategy of de-radicalizing people against America by putting these sanctions in place, you see how it fails? The protesters chanted anti-American slogans. So yeah, I'm sure that you win the people over now. You got Afghan businesses involved in this as well. You got organizers that are calling out the war criminal Anthony Blinken, as you see here. Man, this is unhinged foreign policy that we are seeing, and we're seeing resistance on that front. But Saul, you want to chime in? What do you want to add?
Because I want to add another point about come back to COVID and to add yet another example of policies that actually hurt us directly, right? Like let's for a moment put aside that human beings are human beings. And so if we talk about human rights, we should care no matter what border they live in. But if we're only looking from the US perspective, one of the main reasons why dealing with the pandemic on a global scale is so important is because it's a global phenomenon. And so we are not protected from variants. That's exactly the situation we exist in right now, right? Why we needed to vaccinate everybody at the same time is to avoid these variants, because even though the US has so many vaccines, we're still, we're worse off now than we were when we didn't have the vaccines to a certain extent. I mean, number of cases at least. But from the very beginning of the pandemic, this is March of 2020, February and March of 2020, we had a different administration in power. You had international calls saying not to politicize the pandemic, to lift sanctions, and to ease sanctions in light of the pandemic, because they knew for a fact that, for instance, in the case of Iran, one of the earliest and hardest hit countries in February of 2020, it was impeding the ability of Iran to import humanitarian goods, essential medicines, medical equipment, right? And this is not me saying this. This is what Joe Biden said in April of 2020. Joe Biden in April of 2020 said that despite humanitarian exemptions, US sanctions are impeding the flow of humanitarian goods into Iran. It's not just Iran, right? You look at Venezuela, you look at Cuba, you look at the blockade in Yemen that we support, you look at sanctions in all of these different places. It impedes the global fight against COVID. And that affects us. And yet we still continue with these policies. So there is a certain point where there's no logic behind it, unless, again, what outweighs public health, what outweighs, what the majority of Americans want, what outweighs what is beneficial to global security is simply the interests of certain groups and certain people in the country who push these policies, especially hawkish policies, and try to maintain these sort of adversarial relationships.
I want to show this, and I will get you in here, Peter, because there is a interesting contrast between how the United States is acting on an international scale in the midst of this pandemic versus, let's say, a country that we always demonize, let's say Cuba, for example, right? In the middle of a pandemic where we had experts warn about the humanitarian effects that sanctions will cause in the pandemic, and we can't, and like Asal said, we can't politicize this. We can't have sanctions on these countries. We got to make sure everyone is taking care of this pandemic. The United States have been waging genocide in Yemen. They've been continuing to sell arms deals to Saudi Arabia and Israel, and while Israel has been bombing Gaza and Palestine in the middle of a pandemic. Now let's compare this to what Cuba has been doing. Now I think this is worth mentioning because I think this is the kind of awareness that break the propaganda that our states always want to repeat, like constant anti-Cuba propaganda. Look, compare the two states. We sanction and fund genocides in the middle of a pandemic. Cuba donate vaccines to Syria. You see the difference? You had Cuba that is sending doctors to developing countries throughout the course of this pandemic, helping their healthcare infrastructure out. So while they are exporting doctors, we are exporting bombs. You see the difference in the Western capitalist way of doing things that I believe we must oppose at all costs. But I'll pass it to Peter, and then we can go around the panel.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a Haitian journalist who pointed out that in the Americas, Colombia's main export seems to be mercenaries, because it was Colombian mercenaries that murdered the Haitian prime minister, and they also export their mercenaries to Yemen because Saudi troops can't fight for shit, so they have to, import mercenaries. So Colombia is exporting mercenaries. What is Cuba known for exporting? Doctors and vaccines, and not just vaccines that in general, but vaccines that Cuba itself produced, because it invested so much in its healthcare sector over the years of the revolution, because they realized, we've got this Goliath just a few, tens of miles north of us that can crush us. And if they can cut us off from medicine, then we're really screwed. So yeah, they're able to produce their own vaccines. They're exporting those now. Speak of the devil. But yeah, it's really amazing. Yeah, it's really sad. And then of course, if you look at the U.S., main exports are weapons. Among its main exports are weapons. It's the biggest arms dealer in the world.
So this is this is kind of stuff that Cuba does, and I want to see if I can find the story about them getting doctors. But I want to get Josana in. Josana, anything you want to add?
Oh my God, if I could add anything, I would add so much. But anyways, that is to say that I want to curse so bad. It's just like every single story Asal is like explaining to us about Iran and then about Afghanistan. It's kind of personal to me because it brings me back to my childhood. Like, this economy that doesn't grow, they don't let you do nothing. And the fact that Cuba has they're the best medical, like, in the world. They're amazing. But we never knew that because of the sanctions. And I just wanted to say, like, it's funny though, because the government in the US works directly in the people's sense of empathy, right? Because if you were throwing a bomb in a kid's hospital, people can put that all over social media. There is a video of a bomb and blah. But you're sanctioning. More than half of the people that won't look for it to read or that watch just like regular corporate news media won't kind of know that what sanctions really do. Because it's like, it's almost the people, the way that the corporate media addresses it is almost like the people from Afghanistan was sanctioning themselves. They were the ones that brought that upon themselves. And they have no resources. And like, I remember seeing the news about children in the north of Brazil, like 11 years old or younger, prostituting themselves for a piece of meat. So whenever I hear that parents are selling children, these things hit really like close to home. It's really hard for me to add anything. It's just, I just feel it. I hate it.
I mean,
go ahead, Saul.
I was just going to add, I understand I can try to understand how hard it is to hear this kind of stuff. It's hard to put yourself in that position, right? A lot of times if somebody hears something like they are, it's almost a meaningless sentence in the United States to say they're selling their children. What does that even mean? And sometimes those people are the ones who are actually judged. Like, judgment is passed on them. Like, who would do this? And I remember that when we have a continuing refugee crisis, but when you had like these boats that would go and kids would drown in the waters, and people would say, why would a parent do that? And it's like, well, can you imagine what it is that they're escaping? Like, no parent wants to do this. It's not like people in these countries are less human. It's not like they're more prone to violence. They are not inherently violent. They don't care for their children less. And the fascinating part, and at the beginning, Nick, when you were talking about it, you said, the very people who were using human rights points when it was about keeping a military occupation in Afghanistan, suddenly they disappear when it's sanctions related. They don't seem to care anymore about human rights. And because it's so unfortunate that human rights is such a political tool, it's such a talking point to use. If you want to know if we believe in human rights, let's just think about this for a second. The U.S. is currently plays a central role in the world's worst ongoing humanitarian crisis. That's in Yemen, right? So these stories coming out of Afghanistan about parents having to basically sell their own children to be able to feed the others, that's already been happening in Yemen. So that's a Saudi-led war, a Saudi-led blockade. What is the U.S. response to its own ally carrying out war crimes and carrying out a blockade that is starving people? We don't do anything. Apparently, the only leverage the United States government has is to starve people. But when we actually have allies, that means we have no leverage. It makes no sense, right? It makes no sense to say starvation is the only tool of leverage that we have, but allies and friends and I don't know, hundreds of billions of dollars in arms sales is somehow not leverage over anything. What do? We still sell arms to Saudi. So we are complicit in the world's worst ongoing humanitarian crisis. Here's the best part.
Again,
we're also now complicit and play a central role in the world's worst unfolding humanitarian crisis, and that's in Afghanistan. So the human rights country is now responsible for number 1 and 2 worst humanitarian crisis on the planet, but human rights. That's what we talk about endlessly.
Yeah, because human rights in China are China's violations of human rights are the main thing we should be focusing on. It's just amazing how, like I was talking about this with some friends in Mexico. It's just amazing how good, how powerful U.S. soft power is. So, like how well the propaganda system works. That people can take seriously U.S. politicians, U.S. pundits, blob members, etc., trying to get the world to think that the main battle today is between democracy and authoritarianism, as if like the authoritarian countries are firm ideological believers in this ideology called authoritarianism, and they just love having like a strongman power, and they just hate freedom so much they just want to crush it everywhere, and they don't stop to think who are the people laying this charge? Who are the people making this criticism? They're the same people who are responsible for the gravest humanitarian crises in the world today, that they are actively fomenting, not just not doing anything about, but actively helping to occur. It's just mind-blowing.
I want to give you guys some context about what we was referring to, and just so you guys know the real consequences of the United States foreign policy. So this is what we was telling you guys about earlier. Parents selling children show desperation of Afghanistan. This was written January 3rd of this year. So you had someone who sold their 10-year-old into marriage because otherwise they will starve. Many of the Afghanistan's growing number of destitute people are making such desperate decisions as their nation spirals to the vortex of poverty. Once again, cannot stress enough, because of Biden and their economic warfare in Afghanistan. And imagine the position you have to be in to make a decision like that. Because the mindset is, that they explain, is you sacrifice one or you all die. That's the mindset they had to make. So they had to decide, and they had to decide, sacrifice one, save the rest. That's the devastating position that United States foreign policy puts people in. So that's a giant part and very important part of being anti-imperialist. And we also mentioned Cuba. I did some digging. I found this as well, and I want to give you guys thoughts on this, because I always like to compare the different government responses to this new crisis that we face, right? And as you see here, Cuba shows an alternative to big pharma always show with a hegemony through global solidarity. Cuba puts people before profit, showing the world an alternative to a monopolistic practice of big pharma. It promotes a public health system, state-funded research, and shows global solidarity through tech transfer and vaccine delivery to developing countries, like we were just saying earlier before. This is the true response of a country that actually give a fuck about the people who have, right? We live in a country with so much contradictions where they pretend they care about public health. Meanwhile, they can't even give us health care that will save over 1/3 of the people who died in the COVID pandemic, according to studies. And yet, here in this article here, and yet another successful story from Cuba, the country has fully vaccinated more than 85% of its population. And we talk about this with Danny Haiphong. You don't have to put these restrictive mandates in place when you have people who actually believe in their government is working on behalf of public health. Because of the corruption of people like Fauci and the CDC, that builds mistrust. That's why you have a large segment of people who they won't believe anything that public health officials say in the United States. And as someone who as an athlete who had to relearn a lot that they told us about nutrition on behalf of big food as well, you know that these people are corrupt and bought. And that's why we struggle in this country, because of the mistrust. But Cuba, they don't have that problem. Another 7%, and then another 7% that got the single dose. So I think they're saying, if I'm getting that wrong, 94% got at least a single dose. I think that's what they're saying there. In Cuba, children below 5 years of age have also been vaccinated. The vaccination drive in Cuba also includes children in the age groups of 2 and 18. Wow. So the U.S. only managed to vaccinate 60 to 70% of their population. Once again, just compare that to Cuba and their success. So when I share stories like these, you can see that it's not even me just imposing ideology. These are just the facts, because this is Cuba's response. Cuba is sending doctors. Cuba's healthcare system is way better than us, despite, as they say here, despite the trade sanctions and embargo that the United States has put on Cuba. Despite the massive amount of resources they have lost because of our rogue criminal state. I don't know what other way to put it. As reported by Oxfam, the sanctions imposed by the U.S. has not only crippled the Cuban economy and affected people, but also impacted the raw materials for developing vaccines. Bruh. So not only the Cubans, they got this vaccine, they shipped it to other countries. They did despite the fact that the embargo impacted the raw materials for developing the vaccine and diagnostics. No matter what your ideology, how can you not say that's not incredible, right? So I'm going through this slide with you guys. Any thoughts? And we can get into some comments. Peter, I see you want to chime in, right?
Yeah, you reminded me of a comment that Rob Wallace made. He writes for Monthly Review a lot, and it was a really good point that I'd never thought of. You know how you hear about the experience of NGOs or UN bodies like going to underdeveloped countries and trying to do like vaccination drives or some sort of public health intervention, and they find like it's nowhere near as easy as they thought. Like they thought they would just go and people would be like, oh, thank you. Thank you for this free vaccine, or thank you for this free medicine, or thank you for this free medical intervention, whatever. But they found their experience that that's not what often happens. Oftentimes there's a lot of mistrust because it's like, my entire life, nobody gives a damn about me. And then all of a sudden this foreigner is coming in and offering me something for free. Like, this is a little suspicious. So people in this community had to come up with ways to build trust before their medical interventions would work. And the point he was making is, well, because the US and other countries have such a poor healthcare system, and so many people have been excluded from it because it's a rationing system based on how much money you have. You have the exact same thing going on that people in the medical community have been talking about in terms of the underdeveloped world happening right in the core of the developed world for the exact same reasons, that people are excluded from the healthcare system. They develop a lot of distrust towards the government. And so when it comes to a vaccine that's being offered to them for free, it's no wonder that you have all of these like conspiracy theories spreading, all of this like idiocy about vaccines are bad, or we shouldn't take them, etc. Well, that's exactly what we've seen throughout the rest of the world among deprived people. Well, because we've got so many deprived people in the United States, you've got the same thing. And that's a major difference with Cuba, where they have a healthcare system that, although it's nowhere near as funded, like it gets a fraction of the amount of money poured into it, even on per capita terms compared to the U.S. But because it's been built to provide care for all, you don't have that sense of distrust, and that's why Cuba has the highest vaccination rate in the world right now.
I love this comment by Kristen. Sorry, I messed that up. But
that's a great book, by the way. Reclaiming the State in the little Avi there. Highly recommend it.
Oh, really? Yeah, nice. Based Kristen, based. Not giving us healthcare is a sanction on its citizens. I love that framing. That's essentially what it is, because we pay this private tax, right? I don't understand why there's conservatives who don't understand that. I mean, there's a significant amount, about 1/3, according to Poland, who support Medicare for all, but there's some who they rather pay this private tax to a company that don't even guarantee you healthcare and good healthcare outcomes. Doesn't make sense. So that's a great way to put it. I do want to address the super chat as well. Then you've been Zinjo. Over the past 20 years, U.S. and allied air forces have dropped over 337,000 bombs and missiles in other countries. That is an average of 46 strikes per day for 20 years. Wow. Yeah. So when you put in that kind of
context, you are 20 years old right now, that's the amount of bombs that exist in your lifetime. Sorry, Nick.
No, it's just when I hear these things, I don't understand how people do that thing. When Peter was mentioning how like people are like, oh, I want to focus on everything that China does. Like there's a reason why our country is consistently ranked as the greatest obstacle towards world peace. Like we're the greatest terrorist threat because of this kind of stuff. We got other countries that are working in a way of global solidarity, like Cuba is, and now you have the Western hegemony capitalist society melting down over the Cuban Chinese alliance on the Belt and Road Initiative that just popped off now. You got Russia and China that's in talks now. Now their whole Western philosophy is under attack, and they see it, and we love to see it, right? I know what side I'm on. I'm biased as hell. I'm biased, so you guys know what side I'm on. But Saul, you want to add something?
Well, I thought it was important that you brought up that statistic about how the world, because Peter made a comment earlier about how
I'm going to find it.
There's a bunch of them actually, but yeah. Peter brought up another point before about sort of like how propagandized we are, and so the way that you can look at it is that disconnect, the way that we see ourselves versus the way that the world sees us. So there's this idea that when we talk about the perceptions of U.S. policy, U.S. rhetoric, and sort of how we carry ourselves in the world, there's our perception, and then there's the perception of everyone else in the world. And, poll after poll for years has shown that most of the world thinks that the U.S. is the biggest threat to peace. The U.S. is the biggest threat to democracy. I think it was last 2 years ago that there was a poll. I forgot if it was an international poll or just in Germany, but there was a poll that compared, authoritarian leaders of the world with Trump and asked who was the most dangerous leader. Trump got the most votes by far. So there is a global perception that the U.S. is a huge threat to all of the things that we claim to be the leaders of. And that's something very interesting, that we don't have really even any self-awareness of the way that others see us.
Yeah, great point. Let's see if I can find it. God damn it. I want to show, because Here it is. Here it is. This is actually pretty new. I don't know if I read this one, but like Saul said, there's plenty. Like this is not like hard information to find. So let's go through this article here. Let's go. I think this should be fun. This is from Truth Out. This came out about 2 months ago in November. It said people name U.S. as major threat to world peace. Here's why. And I remember the viral video clip that was on Twitter of this American guy. He was in Pakistan, and he was having this friendly conversation with this guy, and then they were like, "Where are you from?" He's like, "I'm from America." And he was like, "Terrorist state." You're from the terrorist state. So here's a hint, guys. If you're traveling abroad and if you're American, tell people you're from Canada. That's what I'm gonna do. But anyway, so I love how they mentioned how the United States only country that actually dropped the atomic bomb on Japan, as they mentioned. But yeah, if you look at the deaths that started from the very beginning of like the Reagan administration, and maybe you can go back further. Maybe I'm not 100% accurate when I say this, but if I was to say the new age of neoliberalism started from, as they say here, the Reagan administration on, because if you look at the Biden administration, I always joke around, I always say it's like the 11th term of Reagan. But if you was to mark that, imagine how many people died as a result of like the actions of the Contras in the Global South, CIA funded operations in the Global South, the war on terror that we're still continuing. All this stuff combined is why people will see why people see us as the biggest threat. So this article pretty much go through the reason why. Just skimming through it here. They go then. I like this article. This is a good article though. Cause I see they going through the crimes of the Bush administration. They were talking about the Reagan administration. But yeah, this is why we're the number one threat. And when you look at the global, sorry, Josana, sorry, do you want to chime in? But anyway, if you look at the global threat, this is why I say you need an international coalition. And once again, we still debating the term anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist coalition, because it's just this empire that we're facing now is a threat we've never seen before, right? So I'll pass it to Sana. I think we're gonna do a Brazil story now, right? Let's
we have Tita. He's coming up, and I would love to have him a little bit before we transition to the Brazilian story, because I think this story has everything to do with what we're talking about. Who is the real terrorist and who is being accused of being a terrorist, right? I'm with him here. So if you want to keep on going, Nick, a little bit, just so I can help him into the studio now.
Yeah. I can read some comments while we wait for our new guest. We did bring a guest on, so we can go through some comments as well.
I can comment about something that you just said.
What was that, Saul?
I said I can follow up on something you just said.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because you were talking about the why the world sort of sees the U.S. as a threat and use the word empire, and that's precisely it, right? Like it's not a coincidence that the world sees the most powerful country in the world as the threat. You typically, historically, do not get to the apex of power by planting trees. That's not usually the way that it happens. And just one of the threats we sort of talk about much less that's specific to the U.S. Is climate, because climate is theoretically something that affects everybody, right? This is not a national issue, much like the pandemic. If the pandemic was a dress rehearsal for how we're going to deal with global issues, I mean, we're screwed for climate change because we sucked at this one, right? Like this was an utter failure across the board in a global response to something. But for instance, I actually tweeted this today. I was like, you have the Biden administration that comes in and talks about climate, like climate's really important, except for the fact that the U.S. military budget actually increased under Biden. And so while on one hand, he might be doing more funding and actually does believe in climate change compared to his predecessor, At the same time, we are funding one of the world's biggest polluters, one of the world's historically biggest polluters, which is the US military. So we, again, in the world of sort of doing things that are illogical, it's because what we say does not fit what we do. You can't have sort of internationalism and this idea of a global community and global responses when you still have empire. The entire point of the international community was to get rid of empires. And we are an empire. As long as we choose empire, then we don't care about internationalism. We don't care about the global community. And that's why we don't care about these threats that we face, like climate, like pandemics, like, if we care about nuclear proliferation, like we've been stuck talking about Iran, which has no nuclear weapons. The US is still building new nuclear weapons that, according to like what is it? I think it's called Bulletin for Atomic Scientists, are 20 times more powerful than the bombs we dropped on Hiroshima. They describe it as bombs that we haven't even created yet, that we're still in the process of creating, even though we have thousands of them already, that are the size of a bowling lane. Like, what do we plan to do with these things? We could potentially kill all human life on Earth, and yet we still create these types of weapons. So that's why people everywhere else in the world think that we're a threat, because our actions are threatening to human civilization, to the species. It is a threat.
It's funny. It's funny you mentioned climate change because I want to show you guys this, and then we're gonna go transition to the next story because this is what Asal was just mentioning. And I'm gonna do a dive on this here very soon. But U.S. emissions roll back. So emissions are back. Like the United States is back, baby. So Biden's main goal is to get the economy back. We had a slight emissions drop, mostly because people was working at home more under Donald Trump. But now people are back. We're rushing to get the economy back open. Also because we had a joke of infrastructure political theater that wasn't even honestly trying to tackle the pandemic. The climate crisis. So despite a lot of people that say we just vote for a Democrat, we support neoliberalism, that actually was put us on a road to find climate change, actually not the case. Like things are getting worse, as we've shown here. But I'm gonna pass to Josana. I'll dive into that another time because despite all the promises, and this is something that that's all Greta actually mentioned. Despite all the promises that world leaders has made, there has been no policy and no attempt from global industry to actually lower emissions at all. But anyway, we dive into that another day. I'm gonna pass it to Josana. We got guests here.
So before we transition to our climate change subject about Brazil, we are going to talk to Tita. My brother Tita is going to tell us his story, and it's based in a very interesting conflict that's happening in Cameroon. And please, Tita, floor is yours.
Hey everyone. Um,
Oh, sorry,
uh,
Tita. I muted you for
sorry.
accident. We can hear you now.
Oh, okay. Hello everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon. Wherever you're at. My name is Tito Smith, and I am a Cameroonian. I happen to be from the Anglophone side of Cameroon, and basically Cameroon was colonized by the Germans, and after the defeat of the Germans during the First World War, uh, Cameroon was divided among Britain and France, and France got the lion's share of Cameroon. So, which was later on known as East Cameroon, and West Cameroon was administered by the British as an integral part of Nigeria. So during Cameroon got its independence, the United Nations asked, technically there were three questions that were supposed to be asked if Anglophone Cameroon wants to get its independence. or if it wants to be administered as an integral part of Nigeria, or if it wants to be reunited with its francophone brothers. So technically, Britain and France made it in such a way that just two questions were asked if we wanted to be integrated into Nigeria, or we wanted to be reunited with the francophone Cameroon. So basically, France and Britain made a mess of everything here, and at the end of the day, we voted that we wanted to be integrated with uh, uh, Francophone Cameroon. Basically, part of the northern part of Anglophone Cameroon voted to be integrated with Nigeria, so we lost a part of the territory. And ever since independence, the agreement was that it was going to be a federal state, Federal Republic of Cameroon. That is why if you look at our history, you're going to see two stars, the green, red, yellow flag. You're going to see two stars. The two stars indicated West Cameroon and East Cameroon. That is Francophone Cameroon and Anglophone Cameroon. And ever since, we've had horrible presidents who, from Amadu Ahijo, who came in and attempted to change the state of the nature, and our current president, Paul Biya, who equally favored that transition into from a federal republic to a Republic of Cameroon with just one star at the middle of our flag. So it's been crazy. A couple of years ago, teachers and lawyers had to manifest for the rights, because ever since independence, the Anglophones have been treated as a second-class citizen in Cameroon, and we've been marginalized, or we've been called all sort of names. We've been alienated to the back, and we're never in front of the of issues of that of the fate of our country. So we've been alienated, we've been marginalized, and it's really been tough. So a couple of years ago, teachers, because I'm basically a philosophy teacher, had to strike, and the strike, peaceful march, and lawyers, was that the Cameroon government, the French, which is basically French speaking, should stop sending French speaking teachers into Anglophone schools. Like, they were trying everything possible to kill the Anglophone culture in us. They wanted to assimilate us and all the like. So basically, Britain and France made a mess of everything here, and we are suffering up to today. So this crisis started 5 or 6 years ago, and it has led to, according to the human right watch in Cameroon, it's led to close to 12,000 people dead, from women and children. And the Francophone Cameroon, which is the government of Cameroon, sorry, which is basically French speaking, think they can win the crisis militarily. So that is why, if you look at Anglophone Cameroon, there are so many villages that have been abandoned, villages that have been burned down. The military has been committing these crimes, raping women, killing some. It's really been very, very tough for my country, and so many times we have petitioned the British, government, for their responsibility, for accountability for what happened to us, and they have kept on ignoring us. I think it is the United States that has made just these comments to try to see how our president, who happens to be a dictator, was this person that supports this system that is put in place by white capitalists to keep on impoverish Africa, and Africa, and blacks as well. So I'm saying this because um, he's a system. There's a French has put a system in Cameroon that They control virtually everything. They are into our politics. They are into our economics, our economy, and it's not really been easy. Well, I basically I've never so the people of Anglophone Cameroon. I'm sorry, guys. Um, basically started fighting for the federated states to return. And as it happens, most people that suffered from the crisis, the Anglophones in Cameroon, wanted, or some started clamoring for the independence of the territory. So somewhere along the line, some other groups, rebel groups, developed, and it became the conflict became very, very messy, and people started clamoring for independence of this territory. I just want to precise that I've never shared this view. I believe we can do better as a people, and I believe in my country, and I believe that what makes Cameroon unique, it's is the fact that we are very, very diverse. A country that is Africa's in miniature, and that is made of over 20,000 different, 2,000 different local languages and cultures and all the like. And that is what makes us strong. So for a while now, I'll travel to most towns in the Anglophone Cameroon, and I'll host these talks on those who are fighting for secession, for the territory to secede. And I'll tell them that we have bad government. There's a system that is put in place, and if our leaders don't follow the system, they are either called dictators, or which they are, or they are killed, or they are murdered, like we've seen in other countries. I can talk about there are just so many other countries in Africa that the same thing is almost happening to. So I will host these talks, and I'll talk to the youth, and we've had a peaceful protest, peaceful march, to try to see how the government to guarantee the safety of troops in the Anglophone Cameroon, because teachers have been murdered, students have been murdered in school, and there have not been a school going on for the past 5 or 6 years in this territory. Like no students go to school, and there have been an influx from people are moving from the Anglophone section of Cameroon, which is underdeveloped as compared to the Francophone side, to the Francophone side. So schools are not going on, things are not moving on normally in this territory, and we'll be going to those places. We'll be encouraging us enough to host the talks, and that things need to get back to normal. The crisis is escalating. So many innocent lives are being lost, and well, I teach philosophy, and I'll transmit the origin of our problem, where we went wrong as a nation, or what we need to do to try to see how we can have a better Cameroon. A couple of months ago, we had this peaceful march that the government want us teachers to go back to school and teach, and they should guarantee our safety, because the rebel groups in these Anglophone territories are kidnapping and are murdering both teachers and students, not just the military. I'm not just going to be one-sided here. There are factions of the rebel group are kidnapping and murdering teachers and students as well. So we have this peaceful march, and since I could not speak for the government, I could not speak in favor for the government. I've had a couple of death threats. I've been called up a couple of times, and I've been molested. With beaten. I have marks all over my body. Up to now, I still feel effects of the ill treatment that was given to me, and they just arrest you, and that is what happened in the territory. Youths are arrested, and they are never seen and heard from again. I was lucky that I had somebody which I'm not going to mention his name, which worked in the administration. He's an Anglophone that sympathizes with most of us, and he has been helping us running away from the country. So apparently, he tried to find out because I've been hiding in this neighboring territory, and things have really been tough for me so far because where I am, I can't really disclose, but it's closer to Cameroon, and I could be called up anytime and maybe extradited back to Cameroon. So he's been inquiring, working together with my family in Cameroon to try to see how the situation back at home. And I received a picture, a photo of my wanted of arrest. I'm wanted for grounds of terrorism, firearms. They're calling me a secessionist and all this. I've never seen a gun in my entire life. The only time I've seen a gun, well, with the hands of the military. So it's really been tough for me as well. Um, I don't feel like I've been disconnected from my family, you know, from my friends and my loved ones.
I'm really, 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 I'm really, really sorry, brother.
This is why we
I'm
gotta
really
show
sorry you're
critical
going through
support.
this.
This is why we gotta show critical support to our international brothers and sisters too. This is why we want to highlight this as well. This is real trauma that people are going through, as you see here. And the only thing I can say, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. And we got the our great friend Quaker Anarchist. She's been sharing the links for people that want to show support for Tita. Just thank you for coming on. I hope that we can give you guys support. And this is what we have to do, guys. We gotta do everything we can in our power to show love and solidarity to these people any way we can, right? So
Chita, so Chita is an activist because he's a teacher, just because of that. So I think that's where imperialism will get. And I'm so sorry, brother, that you're going through this. I really am. And it's important for us to develop empathy because it's not, Tita is here. We got together and he's here now. How many other people have been suffering the attacks of imperialism? He's a teacher and he is being accused of terrorism because he is sharing critical thinking. That's the bigger picture of that story. It doesn't matter like anywhere you go, that's where you get. Anywhere you go, that's where you get. The rest of the world is suffering attacks, constant attacks from the USA. Tita, I want to let you go rest. Thank you so much for your presence here. I want to know if Asal or Peter want to ask you anything or say anything, but I want to let you go rest, brother. And we understand that it's no condition for human being to be estranged from those they love or they want to be sharing community with. But we are here and we will support you.
Tita, if you don't mind, I'm curious if when the British and the French empires split up Cameroon between themselves, did they make the split on the basis of ethnic groups so that it's a linguistic difference today and an ethnic group difference, or did they just split it without regard whatsoever for the differences in population and it was only about resources and control?
They basically just took the map and draw a line, you know, without putting into consideration the different ethnic groups, without taking into consideration all these factors if people were compatible. And we're still feeling the effects of this up to date. Like there are some tribes that are that were basically the same, but that are now different. So they basically or just draw a line on a map or something. And France had the lion's share, and Britain took a little part to administer it as an integral part of Nigeria.
Anybody else has anything to ask Tita?
No, the only thing I can say, I just implore anyone, if you have any extra change, anything, throw some solidarity to Tita's way, and appreciate you being on. And um, I think we can start to wrap up too, right? But Tita, thank you for coming on and sharing your story, brother.
Thank you, Tita. Oof.
Yeah.
I was going to bring up the consequences of climate change in Brazil. I think we can talk about that in another opportunity if you want. Yes, we need to support Tita and other refugees as much as we can, because one of the reasons why I brought him here, because the other reason is because I've been working with him and he's such a great human being. The reason why I brought him here is also because we never think of the people that are crossing the border right now at this moment as refugees. We always think they're immigrants. It's like it's inherent, like I want to go and immigrate. It's not that. A refugee is seeking for refuge. They do not want to leave their hometowns. They do not want to leave their children. They do not want to leave their family and come here because the USA is so cool and amazing. No. They do it for necessity. So when we start seeing these stories and like unveiling, like taking away that veil of imperialism out of our eyes, then we can develop empathy and do better, because us as individuals in this country, we have to do better. The movement has to come from us.
What's that? Josana? Any last words I want to send off? Peter, make sure you guys subscribe to BetBeat too. They've been dropping some great videos recently. I checked out the last few ones. So, Peter, any last words you want to? Any last thing you want to say before we sign off here?
Yeah, just I think like that topic of climate change and its political implications is really important. So I hope next time we can get into
I think
the recent.
next year we can do a climate change. I got a few stories that we can talk about. I got a few.
I can bring up Brazil if y'all have the time. But I think Nick can
Yeah,
also.
no,
If you want to
exactly.
stay, we can stay, Peter, if it's okay.
No, I mean today I've got to get to work, but I really want to learn about the most recent climate impacts in Brazil, and maybe we can do like a whole show, like bringing in examples from Brazil, examples from other parts of the world, and then kind of wrap it all up into like what ideally needs to be done, and then how we can put pressure or create the organizations that we need to actually do that.
Yeah, so I think that'll be next stream. Saul, any last things you want to send us off with?
I mean, obviously, this was a very sort of heavy way to end this discussion, but I actually think that that's important, right? We have these conversations, and sometimes they feel abstract. It feels like we're just talking about theories, and we're talking about politics and ideas, and we're talking about people. Like ultimately, that's why we're here. That's why we're trying to have these conversations, and I think putting a human face to those stories is really important. So I would just end it on that, and I'll agree with Peter that I do think the climate topic should just have there's so much to talk about and unpack. So definitely something that we should discuss in a whole show.
You guys are super right. I'm here, like, I drank coffee at 6 p.m. and I couldn't stop, like, texting Nick, we're going to do this, we're going to do that in the show. And he was like, okay, we will. I'm super susceptible for caffeine. But yeah, it would be good to talk about the client, like, interconnect all these natural disasters and maybe make a more, like, in-depth analysis of it.
Yeah, sounds good. So tomorrow, CJ and Liv will be live, and then he has his left panels he usually do on Wednesday nights. And then Thursday we have our roundtable we do as well. Friday, Saturday, our show, and Saturday I have my show. We can have Pasta and Misty on. So make sure you subscribe, share with a friend. Hope you guys enjoyed our show tonight. Have a great night, guys. Take care.
Good night.